Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and each week I interview military veterans about their civilian career. Today is episode number 80 with Zach Scheel and Drew DeWalt.
And so the two of us grabbed beers in Santiago when we were overlapping down there, kind of talking about this same problem. And about 3 months later, we had decided to officially co-found Rhumbix together.
Well, my favorite part of that 3 months later story is actually, you look at 3 or 4 months of being in and around the idea, getting comfortable with it, but then it really took a leap of faith. And the moment for us was actually, we did a whiskey tasting and tour over at Alameda at St. George's Spirits. And after a great tour and continuing to talk about Rhumbix, we were sipping some whiskey and looked each other in the eye and said, let's do this.
The top 2 reasons to listen to today's show are, number 1, co-founder. If you're thinking of starting your own company, one of the first things you'll need to decide on is whether to go solo or with co-founders. And if you get this wrong, it's the fastest way to destroy your company. Zach and Drew are both Navy vets who co-founded a successful Silicon Valley startup, and they talk about how they vetted each other and focused on difficult questions up front to make sure that they would have a lasting working relationship. Number 2, tactics. Zach and Drew have a wealth of advice on everything from running a company, maximizing your efficiency through scheduling, managing work-life balance for the long haul, and committing to continued personal growth as your company grows. As always, at beyondtheuniform.io, you'll find show notes for this episode with links to everything we discuss. You'll also find a directory of veteran resources, ebooks, and recommendations for other websites, podcasts, and books. If you're interested in any of those books, Audible.com is offering Beyond the Uniform listeners a free audiobook of your choosing. You can find out more at beyondtheuniform.io/books. So with that, let's dive in to my interview with Zach and Drew. Well, joining me today in San Francisco, California is Zach Scheel and Drew DeWalt from Rhumbix. Welcome to Beyond the Uniform, guys.
Happy to be here.
So quick background on both the company and Zach and Drew. So first of all, Rhumbix is based in San Francisco, and it's a mobile platform designed for the construction craft workplace. They were founded back in 2014 and have raised over $13 million in funding so far from investors including Greylock Partners, Mortar Ventures, Spectrum 28, and Glynn Capital. Zach is their co-founder and CEO. He started out at Duke, after which he served in the Navy for 5 years as part of the Civil Engineering Corps. After the Navy, he attended Stanford Business School, where he earned not only his MBA, but also a Master's of Science in Renewable Energy. After Stanford, he started Rhumbix. Drew is the co-founder and COO of Rhumbix. He started out at Notre Dame, after which he served for 6 years as an officer on submarines. After the Navy, he attended the Stanford Graduate School of Business, earning both his MBA and his Master's in Public Policy. And after that, he started Rhumbix. And just on a personal note, I've gotten to know Drew and Zach over the last couple of years. These are 2 guys that you just want to cheer for. I consider myself one of many of their fans in the stands cheering them on. They are just such great examples of entrepreneurs and veteran entrepreneurs, and just extremely excited to have them share their story of the continued success they've had at Rhumbix. So guys, maybe just to start out, I think it's always helpful for listeners to learn a little bit about how each of you decided to leave the Navy and how you approached that decision.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think business school had kind of always been on the radar. I commissioned sourced through ROTC at Duke University and had always had an idea of maybe going to business school. As I got towards the end of active service, really had that tough decision of, do I want to stay in or get out? And it was difficult because I had to drop papers to get out before getting accepted to any business schools. So it was a big commitment to basically say, I'm definitely going to go to graduate school. And then from there, it was really just finding a list of schools that I thought I had a chance of getting into at least one of them, and starting that process of separating and transitioning into graduate school.
Yeah, Justin, for my part, you're a little more familiar with my path through the submarine community. And it's one of those, I think it actually led me into what we're doing now in entrepreneurship. And as I looked at my submarine career, as you know, they want you to stay on a submarine for a long time. And I felt like through my first tour of duty, I'd learned a whole lot, and I was not seeing that I was going to learn as much as I was in those first 6 years over the coming next steps. And where else could I do that? And going to business school was a natural next step, and really trying to figure out ways to continue to push myself to be exposed to new things that I hadn't ever been exposed to before and learn a lot more. And so I think that opportunity to continue to grow was a big motivating factor.
And do either of you have advice for vets thinking of going to business school, either on applying to business school or how to get the most out of the experience?
Yeah, I'd encourage vets to reach out to and connect with the veteran clubs. Most business schools have a veteran club, and talk to the current students that are veterans. I had friends from undergrad review my essays, and then I had veteran students at Stanford review my essays, and they were much more critical in a way that led to me being able to put together a stronger application than the feedback that I was able to get from non-military friends. So all veterans, all business schools typically have a veterans club. I would find them and reach out to them. They can be extremely helpful in the application process.
Yeah, probably the only thing that I would add to that is be really thoughtful about if and how business school even makes sense for you. It is a good place to transition. I think one of the biggest values is having 2 years to kind of figure out what there is on the outside of the military, know what private equity is, what venture capital is, what entrepreneurship really means, what management consulting is. There's a lot of different options out there that you're just not exposed to in the military. So a time to do that is a great use of your 2 years in grad school, but it's not a necessary do immediately after you get out. And be thoughtful about what you want to get out of it and when is the right time, because you could also go and do something for a couple years and then get your MBA and potentially be more well prepared depending on your situation. So take a hard look at it. It's not automatic.
And what was the starting point of Rhumbix? Can you remember that moment that was like the spark, the genesis that led to a company that's now raised over $13 million in funding?
Yeah, so after my second year of business school, I had a second internship before the final year of grad school, and I was working in northern Chile at the world's largest copper mine on a large multi-billion-dollar construction project. Where I was looking at labor productivity, and really every day we were collecting 800 to 1,000 paper time cards, and it would take us a week to clean up and audit the data to be able to have the information you need to have weekly meetings on production and profitability of the job site. That was kind of the encounter, the epiphany moment, the light bulb. Hey, this is a big problem. We're losing a lot of money on this project site, and we don't have the data that we need in a timely manner to make decisions as project managers about what we need to do. Essentially, that was kind of also part of the idea for Rhumbix was really taking technology from the military, Blue Force Tracker, and the concept of bringing that level of visibility that we had into battlefield operations to the construction site. Coincidentally, Drew was also down in Chile. His first startup was a renewable power startup, and he was trying to estimate project costs for labor. And so the two of us grabbed beers in Santiago when we were overlapping down there, kind of talking about this same problem. And about 3 months later, we had decided to officially co-found Rhumbix together.
Well, my favorite part of that 3 months later story is actually, and I think it pushes to founding a company, co-founding a company, even deciding to make that leap. When we started talking about what would become Rhumbix, it wasn't an immediate thing that, hey, let's do this. We spent a lot of time going back and forth over the idea, getting warm to it. Then we started doing a little research on the opportunity with somebody else doing this. So you look at 3 or 4 months of being in and around the idea, getting comfortable with it. But then it really took a leap of faith. And the moment for us was actually we did a whiskey tasting and tour over at Alameda at St. George's Spirits. And after a great tour and continuing to talk about Rhumbix, we were sipping some whiskey and looked each other in the eye and said, let's do this. And that was kind of the moment where it was turning off all the other stuff we were considering and saying, this is what we're going to do full time, dedicate ourselves to it. And it took that moment to throw all our energy towards it to really turn it into the next gear.
The secret to finding your ideal co-founder is alcohol, as always. I love it. That was one of the questions I was going to ask too, is just kind of what advice you have. I know a lot of people ask about, how do I find that co-founder? And then once I find them, how do I know they're the right person? And in addition to what you've shared, what other advice would you give for vets about finding someone they could trust to co-found a company with?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of, if not the most important decisions in founding a company is who to co-found it with. I think, Drew and I were extremely fortunate. As a Stanford alumnus yourself, you're familiar with the class Interpersonal Dynamics, more affectionately known as touchy-feely. And so Drew and I were actually in the same 12-person T group before we ever talked about co-founding a company. And so through that class, we shared a total of 70 hours in a small room with the same 12 people, going through a myriad of different interpersonal dynamics that you would encounter in any sort of situation. So Drew and I had a ton of data points on each other as individuals that we were able to draw upon in order to be comfortable with co-founding, because in the absence of those, I can't say, that Rhumbix would have ever happened with Drew and I, because it is a relationship. You are taking a leap of faith into a very risky endeavor with somebody that you really need to be there with you thick and thin, and that is not easy to find someone that fits that criteria, that you're comfortable trusting, growing the business with.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the other thing we did well, informed by some of that experience, was you can't assume, even though Zach and I are both great guys, and I think most people will tell you we're great guys, you can't assume things are going to go as planned. And as such, you can't lean on, we'll figure it out when it happens. So we asked a lot of those hard questions really early on about responsibilities, who owns what are people going to do, and getting agreement on that ahead of time instead of waiting until you're in that hard moment and trying to figure it out. So there was a lot of stuff, a lot of conversations on roles and responsibilities, ownership, all sorts of things that had we waited to just figure it out as we went, I think we would have had potential to negatively affect the relationship, as opposed to laying the groundwork early up front before you're in the middle of it.
I love that. And I love the thought of the trust that you build up, both from the shared values from the military, and then also with that touchy-feely experience of just really getting a deep look at each other. Did you have hesitation, though? I think for myself, when I left the military, I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, assuming that everyone else knew more about business than I did. And I'm wondering if there was hesitation of pairing with another person who had a very similar background and had about the same amount of civilian work experience.
Yeah, no, I think there was a lot of hesitation. And there's been a time, like we talk about it, weekly here at the office. Our employees have so much more startup experience than Drew and I have. We've never been around a sales organization, never built and sold a product before, never been around software engineering before. And so I think, there wasn't hesitation. And I think actually, the thing you need to do is just be very honest with what you don't know, and supplement the team with people that fill those voids. And I think, the fact that what we do have and what we did bring was the small unit leadership of naval officers to the startup world was something that investors found very appealing, where we were able to really kind of show them how the skill set of a junior officer exiting the military is very well suited for early stage entrepreneurship and startups. And I think that has helped us, because, one of the things they'll ask is, okay, well, if you can't do the coding yourself, can you attract, hire, manage, and lead, software engineers? And that's something that I think both of our experiences from the military, just leading divisions and squads of people, of troops, that are very transferable, and that has led to a lot of that success.
And for a veteran audience, I gave a brief overview of Rhumbix at the start, but how would you explain what you guys are doing and where you're headed?
Yeah, I mean, so it's very akin to Blue Force Tracker. We've built out a mobile application that digitizes a lot of data capture that's currently done on pencil and paper in the field and construction sites. And then all that is fed real time into a cloud platform that's running analytics on it, as well as passing the information off to other back office systems, such as payroll. But it's really being that last mile of data collection and digitizing all of the analog processes still on job sites to provide a clear level of visibility into construction operations, similar to the level of visibility that Blue Force would provide into battlefield operations.
And I really respect and like that. I always hate it for some reason when I see companies that have co-CEOs. It just, for some reason, never. I think it's maybe the military background of it doesn't seem right to have you need one point of accountability there. How did you guys decide who would be CEO, and how did you approach splitting up and dividing your responsibilities?
I think it was one of those where we, like I said earlier, we had those tough conversations early on, and I'm not going to say that was necessarily an easy conversation, because Zach and I are both similar personalities, both have a lot of confidence in our abilities, and those are things that you think about. But at the end of the day, when we hashed it out, that was something that didn't matter to us as much. I think like you said, the co-CEO, we talked about it, and we were like, that's kind of ridiculous. It feels like you need to make a decision. And I think what was most important to both of us was figuring out, are we going to be equal partners? Are we going to split up responsibility for running this organization? Are we going to trust each other to make decisions and not micromanage each other? Things along those lines. And that was the most important thing. And so the title stuff, it's sort of like naming your company. You spend a lot of time stressing about it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything if you don't make a compelling company. Same thing, being the CEO of something that's a zero isn't that cool. So really focusing on the most important stuff.
Yeah, I've loved that in your, from what I've seen with the two of you guys, it just seems like it does really seem like it doesn't matter. Like it seems like it's an egoless environment, and you guys work really well, and you're able to influence each other very well without relying on titles. And I'm just wondering if you have any other advice or thoughts on how to continue that working relationship, how co-founders can continue to keep growing together and keep an open dialogue that challenges and supports the other's growth.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it just all goes down to communication, and part of that is build off the level of trust that you have with the co-founder, and it's saying things like, "Hey, man, you're in my swim lane. I thought that was something that we talked about was in my area of responsibility," and it's having those conversations frequently when they come up, just to create really good granularity around what each of our individual responsibilities are, because early on we found ourselves replying to the same emails and stepping on each other's toes a lot. And so just continuing to have those conversations daily, weekly basis about who is doing what, and then being very, being sure that you're not doing, getting the swim lane of the other person unintentionally.
And I think, that's great at a general level and general advice, Justin, but we also took it a step further and tried to codify it into the way that we work together. We even essentially hired an outside advisor to force us to have difficult conversations, to moderate those conversations early on. And we already had some sort of history there that was strong, but continuing to work at it, every day, every week. So there are the one-offs, something's uncomfortable, you talk about it when it happens, but it's also creating that regular space that maybe there's nothing on the top of your mind, but as you dig into it, you realize, hey, this is something that we should be discussing. And so being consistent about it as well, and not just hoping that it happens, because sometimes that doesn't work that effectively over the long run.
Yeah, and so that's a tactical piece of advice. It's like we hired a co-founder coach and would have monthly or bi-monthly sessions with them, and that's exactly what Drew was talking about, is creating that regular space to have conversations that wouldn't otherwise take place in the craziness of startup life day to day.
I love that. I love that metaphor of staying out of my swim lane. I think that's such a great way to effectively communicate without being too aggressive and damaging to the other person. And I really, really, really love that you guys, and respect that you found a co-founder coach. I know one trend that's emerged on the show is the importance of mentors and the importance of coaches. And it's something I'm a huge advocate for. And I love that thought that you're committed to having an incredible co-founding relationship, and you have a coach to help you along with that. I think that's really exceptional. What about fundraising? You two have managed to raise an incredible sum of money from some of the best investors in the world. What advice do you have for veterans about the fundraising process?
Yeah, I mean, you got to be able to hit the metrics and back up the business opportunity and the business that you're building and how you're going to build that. But I think, what has been a lot of our secret sauce is kind of the culture that we've built here at Rhumbix. And, coming out of the military, a very organization very steeped in culture, honor, courage, commitment, core values that you would see at the front of every building you'd enter. Similarly, you come into Rhumbix, you see our company core values pasted on a wall. And so really, I think we've gone and built a unique company and culture that is something that we're able to sell as part of the investment, which helps differentiate you in the market. It's all about really creating separation from the signal to noise ratio, and can be difficult. And so that's one of the ways we've done it. I don't know, Drew, what are your other thoughts?
The other piece I'll point to that we've been told several times is, it feels, the business we're building, the industry we're in, feels authentic to the people that Zach and I are and who we've hired. When we started Rhumbix, almost over 3 years ago from those initial conversations, construction technology was not a space that anybody cared to invest in. It didn't exist on a venture capital radar, but it was something that we knew there was a big problem, and if we could solve it, somebody would pay some significant amount of money for. And so we stuck true to our guns. I think early on in fundraising, you get investors suggesting things for your business model that could take you in all sorts of different directions, but we stayed true to the vision and what we knew to be high value, and that has served us really well. But being authentic to the company that you're doing points to another thing that I think is important in entrepreneurship, because when you decide to start a company, you're signing up to know every in and out of that business better than a whole lot of people. And so choose something that you enjoy and that you want to learn all that stuff about, because otherwise you're stuck working on something that the only motivating factor is some sort of financial exit, as opposed to the experience and the learning that you're going to get out of it.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask about mistakes, because I just feel like that's where all the juice of learning comes from, and particularly in startups where it's just constant learning through mistakes and failures. What are some of the mistakes that you've made with Rhumbix, and what did you learn from them?
Typically, they've been around hiring, specifically around sales hires. We like I mentioned earlier, we've never been around a sales organization or software sales before, and so we'd heard the adage, hire slow, fire fast, but we found ourselves in a couple situations where we pulled the trigger on a hire sooner than we should have, in retrospect. And that led to hiring the wrong person, and that can set the entire company back months, quarters, recovering from a poor hire. And so I think the learning for us was, even when it seems like you absolutely need that person, in reality, waiting a couple more weeks or months to make that hire, and making sure that that's the right person is much more beneficial than succumbing to that pressure that you feel that you have to make that hire instantly, and risking making an incorrect hire.
That's great. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask about as well, is having hired so many people now, what advice do you have around hiring, and how do you try to get a sense of if someone is a good fit or not for the team?
It's one of the toughest tasks out there. As a startup, when you're moving fast, you try to look for any way that you can short circuit the process while still making good decisions. One of the best ways to do that is to build out your network and rely on personal referrals. There's a lot that nobody can know before they actually start working at your company, and vice versa. So you got to do the work up front. Interviewing somebody, doing more technical interviews for engineers and things like that. All that stuff's important. But the most important thing is this person going to be a strong member of my team? Are they going to learn on the job, because that's what everybody needs to do? Are they going to be comfortable wearing a few different hats? Because you're probably going to be asked to do at least a few things that you're not necessarily qualified to do just because it needs to get done. And all that stuff comes from a more personal standpoint. So I would take probably the extreme of hiring software engineers and data scientists. You have to have that technical foundation to be successful. And we would try to do that early on in the interview process, but then you also have a meeting with each of the co-founders early on. You're doing some reference checks from people that you trust, not just a former boss who you don't know. And you're trying to network around somebody to get just a good sense for who they are and whether they're, right for a startup environment, and B, your company specifically.
Yeah, this is an area where we relied pretty heavily on our investors. Throughout the seed stage, we had one of our co-leads of the seed round was a technical investor. And so that individual was screening all of our engineers and helping us with our first director of engineering hire. And those are just interviews Drew and I, no amount of training was going to get us in a position to be able to do a technical screen of a software developer, software engineer. And so building out your network of mentors and looking for investors and being very candid up front. We told them, hey, we bring a depth of knowledge about the construction market, but an area where we're looking for our investors to lean on is help with building out the technical team. And that helps you screen for your investors and make sure you're getting the right ones also.
I think it's always helpful for listeners, especially ones who are on active duty, to get a sense for what life is like in an early stage startup. And I'm just wondering if you could pick a day from last week and each of you kind of talk about what your day-to-day life looked like in as much detail as you're willing to go into in terms of like what time you start and like the type of people you meet with and just anything that would help them get a better sense of what startup life is like.
Yeah, so I'll go through, typically in the office between 7 to 7:30. A lot of times I'll have calls at 8. We have weekly meetings every Monday morning. We call O&I briefs, our operations and intelligence brief, very similar to the one General McChrystal used to lead for JSOC and the Joint Task Force. And so that is a 30-minute meeting where all department heads are putting out information about what everyone's doing. No follow-on conversations. Those all happen after that meeting. But so basically getting in the morning, taking some calls, getting ready for the O&I, have the O&I at 10. Immediately following that is a sales meeting that I'm leading, going over kind of looking at our pipeline, what deals are going to be closing this week, this month, this quarter, looking at longer-term strategy stuff. Got lunch. Typically that's a lunch meeting. Last Monday, then hopped on the BART, headed across town to go visit Kaiser Permanente at 2 different offices in the East Bay. Back to the office around 5:30, and spent a couple hours cleaning out the inbox and doing work in the evening before heading home. So, Drew, anything?
Yeah, I won't reiterate that. My days look pretty similar to Zach's, although working on a few different things. I think one thing in general, again, when we started the company, we had some of those tough discussions and said to ourselves, we don't want to be driving ourselves into the ground or anybody else on our team. We want to maintain that balance, and balance means a lot of different things. It doesn't mean 50-50, but it does mean creating space for your personal life outside of work. And so we've tried to push that hard so people aren't working late into the night, aren't spending a lot of time on the weekends. And we basically said there's going to be times that we have to do that, and we've done it, but we want everybody's batteries fully charged when we got to do those hard sprints, as opposed to keeping everybody at a breakneck pace every day. And so I think that was a big thing that we did that informs it. Probably the other piece I would just say more generally to what Zach put out is there's really three pieces to any of your day that you got to work on. The first piece is the tactical, answering emails, making sure that you're getting back to your lawyers, making sure you're checking this block or that block. And it's really easy to get caught in doing that all day. But a lot of it from some of those meetings Zach's talking about and just other personal time, you have to also find that time to get your nose out from between the to-do list and really continue to think strategically about your business. And the third piece that I think is neglected, if you're just doing the tactical and strategic for your business, you can get really myopic. And it's that third piece of continuing to meet other entrepreneurs, network with investors and other people in your space, and really expanding your touch and your sphere of influence is an equally important third piece that helps you understand your business better and establish your place in the market.
I love that piece on work-life balance. My sense is that that's not talked about enough, and it's so easy. It seems like it's so easy to default to the always on, always in the red zone that I don't think leads to long-term productivity or success. And yet that's just, it's easier to boast about that of like, hey, we're always in the office, we're always working, even when that might be to the detriment of the individual or the team. So I love that that's embedded in your DNA right now. And I love that thought too of just that third piece that you were mentioning, Drew, of that commitment to that personal growth of not just investing everything in the startup, but realizing you need that network. You need those challenging outside influences for yourself and for the company, and getting some of that fresh air into the organization is really awesome. What advice do you have for veterans thinking of starting their own company?
I think Drew touched on a lot of it earlier. It's really looking hard at why you want to start your own company, and what would you want to do for 5 to 7 years. That's typical time horizon the VCs are looking to exit, and or if you're not wanting to go the VC route, something that you're wanting to just build a small business and continue to run and operate yourself. It's what are you going to get excited about doing every day, even in the days that the job sucks the most. And it may not necessarily be what your hobbies are on the outside. And sometimes, I discourage people from, doing what they enjoy as a hobby for a full-time business, because it can ruin that. Like, I love skiing and surfing, but run a construction company during the days and do that on the weekends. It's learn a lot about entrepreneurship. Drew and I are very fortunate to have gone through Stanford Business School, which has a lot of courses on it. But the more you know about entrepreneurship and how it works, the better prepared you'll be to go into those initial meetings with potential VC or an angel investor, and to really increase your chances of having success.
The only thing I would add to that, Justin, is I think do a lot of work before you drop everything else and start your company. It was a kind of a unique time for Zach and I that, he was needing to make a choice on whether he was going to continue looking for jobs, ending up his graduate school. And then for me, figuring out if I was going to move down to South America, which my wife at the time was not super stoked about. So kind of unique timing, but giving yourself enough time up front to really vet the idea, to do some market research, figure out if anybody's doing something the same or similar, figuring out is this an opportunity, and an opportunity, like Zach said, that I really want to get to know in and out for the next 3 to 5 years. Obviously, at some point, you got to take the leap, because you can't build a successful business. You're never going to convince an investor to invest if it's a part-time job for you. You got to take the leap, but the more you can do up front while you ostensibly have another job is going to pay off benefits in the end.
And what resources would you recommend to listeners that have really been helpful for you in your civilian career or specifically in entrepreneurship? And that could be books or podcasts or websites or programs, but just anything that a veteran could today take hold of to start bettering themselves for their civilian career.
Yeah, no, I think there's a bunch of great resources. A lot of the education we got at Stanford is available online. Go look through Stanford Entrepreneurship. There's a whole lot of resources and online courses. Additionally, I think there's great veteran-specific resources. Techstars as the Patriot Boot Camp. You've got Bunker Labs that has offices and accelerators in many major cities. And the accelerators provide you immediate access to a network, and so that's a great way to begin building your professional knowledge is through a network of people who are wanting to support veterans and specifically veteran entrepreneurs. I listen to the A16Z podcast primarily, as well as there's a construction tech podcast that I listen to weekly just to stay abreast of what's going on in the industry. Drew, what resources do you?
Yeah, I wouldn't shy away from some of the standard entrepreneurship tomes out there, like Lean Startup, Hard Thing About Hard Things. Those are going to give you a good sense of the challenges you're going to face for sure. And so I would definitely dig into those. Those are pretty easy things to access. And I think, probably the last thing is really, we've talked about it before, build your network of mentors and associates and build it outside the military. I think that's one of the things is you can lean on other vets and some wealthier, older veterans from decades past, but you really got to broaden your horizon. And I think it's realizing that for your business, your gut instinct and how you want to run it should be the filter through which everything comes in, and not reading a book and doing exactly what the book says, not listening to a well-respected advisor and doing exactly as they say, always continuing to put it through your filter of what's good for your business, because there's no roadmap that steps 1 through 12 gets you to a successful exit. And you've got to continue to trust yourself, but build that sphere of influence with a diverse group.
Yeah, and just two more quick tactical bullet points for listeners out there. So at First Round Review does a good weekly newsletter or daily, and they put out real good content on startups, as well as Tom Tunga's Redpoint Ventures partner. It's Tom, TOMTUNGUZ.com, and he does a daily or every other day blog post that has a lot of great information from the perspective of a VC on what metrics and statistics they're looking for in companies. And I think specifically around enterprise SaaS, that's an unbelievable resource to be able to see what the VC is thinking and looking for.
And also anything that Greylock's Jerry Chen and Sarah Guo have written.
Yeah.
And for listeners, I'll put those in the show notes so you can, at beyondtheuniform.io, you can click on all of those, the podcast, the books, all those great resources. One thing I wanted to know too is, there's so many great assets that we all bring from our military service that serve us as incredible strengths in our civilian career. I'm wondering the flip side though, were there any habits that you had to break, anything that you had to kind of do away with that you learned in the military that was hindering you in your civilian career?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's just being very realistic that when you're in the civilian environment, it's not the military. There's some very valuable stuff that we've brought from our military experience into running this company, but you cannot copy and paste that experience. And some of it's, maybe I would say most of it's around your expectations as a military vet and then now running a company. People don't respond to the same incentives. People are on average less outspoken when they're upset in a civilian environment, and all those things you just have to realize it's not going to happen the way you're used to doing it. And so it's being a lot more sensitive, when you're getting a little tense or stressed about something that you wish was different because it was a lot easier in the military to take that deep breath to reflect on what it is and how you might react a little differently.
And then I'm wondering, in what ways has your roles changed since you first started the company? 3 years ago and $13 million later. What's the biggest changes in each of your responsibilities and day-to-days?
Yeah, I mean, as the team grows, there's just a lot more going on in the company. And so continuing to grow the scope of which aspects of the company Drew and I respectively manage and lead. And so, initially there was a lot more building out the product team and the engineering side that Drew's focused on. And so he really runs everything internally at the company, and I'm more focused externally on sales and fundraising. And so as we've grown and gone through 3 rounds of fundraising, early on with the seed fundraise, Drew and I were doing everything together and very much both involved in the process. And as we've grown, it's more kind of more solidification of those swim lanes and less involvement in the other person's swim lane as the scope of each has grown.
I always like to end on something more open-ended. So, I've tried to ask questions that I think will help veterans and active duty members in their civilian career, but I know that there's a lot that I haven't asked that you guys have a lot of knowledge on. So I'd love to just turn it over to you and say, knowing that you've got an audience of active duty and transitioned veterans, what else would you want to share with them? It could be about personal life or professional life. What else would you want them to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the most important thing I felt when I got to business school that I really didn't know a lot. I was behind all of my classmates who had spent years in consulting and finance and really undervalued my military experience and what it, what skills and talents it left me with. And I think that's something that a lot of veterans can overlook and kind of say, okay, I was in the military, but I don't have all these skills that I need to get a job out in the civilian world. And I think it's really kind of, looking at your military experience as a position of strength that really you should bring with you to any position that you go to, any company you work for, and really leveraging that, because that's something that we've come to learn. A lot of people that worked in finance, consulting, other gigs have never really managed or led people. And so it's, being able to have difficult conversations when they need to be had, not being afraid of that. There's a lot of valuable things that you pick up in the military that you can't learn anywhere else. And it's looking at those as strengths and not as a weakness when you're looking at your next job outside the military.
I'd like to echo exactly what Zach said. I think if I had to be blunt about it, I wouldn't trade my Stanford graduate school business experience for anything. But if I had to put a wager on what has led to success so far, more of it is due to the military experience than going to business school. It is, right, you're going to learn a lot of, again, tactical skills at business school of running a spreadsheet or supply chain logistics, all these great things that, as Zach said, you don't have to go to business school to learn. There's a lot of online resources. But the things that you can't learn at business school, you get in spades in the military, and it's really important to running and growing an organization. The other thing I would say, just for veterans who are considering the entrepreneurship route, I think that the top number one thing is that you can't really get the startup experience that you want unless you're actually doing it. And so that's what I'm saying to a lot of folks is, if you really want to be an entrepreneur, go be an entrepreneur or get as close as you can to it, which means going to a smaller company where you are going to wear multiple hats. When you go work at an Oracle or Cisco or even Amazon and Google, you're going to be very specific and you're not going to learn as much of the broad range skills that you need to be successful as an entrepreneur. And so I think that's one. And then the other one is, you're going in there, as Zach mentioned, tap into that veteran network. There's a lot of resources out there, but I'll put in the caveat is, be ready to take advantage of the resources that are available out there. I would, summarize it. Sometimes it can feel like a veteran says, hey, I'm a veteran, I want to go to business school, or I want to start a company, help me. And there's not a whole lot you can do with that. People want to help, but it's being more specific about the ask of somebody and not expecting a deluge of resources just because you're a veteran asking for help. Come with specific, thoughtful asks of people, and they're going to line up to help you out.
Well, Zach and Drew, this is exceptionally helpful, I think, for veterans and non-veterans. And, I appreciate the advice, the tactical advice, strategic advice you're giving to veterans, but I also really appreciate the role model you are of two veterans working together and growing an incredible company. So thank you for that. And for listeners, you can find them at Rhumbix.com. You can learn more about their company, what they're doing, where they're headed. In the show notes, I'll put in some different articles of TechCrunch, New York Times, Huffington Post, all of which have talked about Rhumbix and the impact they're having on a very, very big industry. So thank you both for your time today.
Hey, thanks, Justin. Happy to be a part of the podcast.
Appreciate it, Justin. We'll catch up soon.
Surface.
Thanks for listening. 3 important notes before you go. First, Audible.com is offering a free audiobook for Beyond the Uniform listeners. I love Audible. I get 3 books a month, and it's a great way to use net, or no extra time, to polish off books while you run, drive, etc. If you go to beyondtheuniform.io/books, you'll not only find this offer, but you'll also find a list of every single book that has been recommended on this show. One in particular I'd recommend is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. This is a great story of determination and also a glimpse at what startups are really like. That's at beyondtheuniform.io/books. Second, there are so many great resources out there for veterans, it can be difficult to know all about them. That's why at beyondtheuniform.io/directory, you'll find a list of every single resource that's been mentioned on the show or that I've been able to find. You can also add your own if you find one I've missed. Lastly, I've put together several different free ebooks that provide data for veterans about their civilian career possibilities. This quantitative information serves as a great complement to the qualitative interviews I do each week. Go to beyondtheuniform.io, click on resources, and you'll be all set. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with military veterans about their civilian career.